seconds later, he threw a useless follow-up punch, but his opponent was too out of it to even respond. His middleweight crown for a long time. Sadly, the predictions were made too soon and didn't come true. From an epic kick that brought Edson Barboza's fight to an end,
and risk getting knocked out. Oh my God! Wow!
To the time a fighter had to be carried out of the ring, here are the top 5 scariest knockouts in UFC history. Starting with Edson Barboza versus Terry Atim at UFC 142. Barboza may never win a UFC featherweight or lightweight title, but that doesn't mean you can take him lightly. The Brazilian kickboxer had a lot of experience in Muay Thai, way before he started competing in MMA. He was strong, explosive, and swift enough to scare everyone. And if there's one thing he was known for, it was his kicks.
Age off now. Oh, and a huge body kick.
Huge liver kick. That might do it.
He's the only UFC fighter who's won fights by kicking his opponents in the legs, body, and head. At UFC 142, his divisional opponents still didn't know the best way to beat him. It was to put pressure on him and close off the space he needed to throw kicks with time and leverage. The second time he fought, he went up against Terry Atim. The fight went back and forth, but when the third round hit the 2-minute mark, the Brazilian finished the fight with a spinning wheel kick.
Chance and risk getting knocked out! Oh my God!
Barboza turned around and his opponent's head hit his heel with all of his weight and momentum. He slumped to the ground with his eyes rolling all the way into the back of his skull. It was the first time a spinning wheel kick knocked out a UFC fighter. And trust me when I say that it was scary to see Atim lying on the mat as still as a statue. Kicks are one thing, but hard punches can do just as much damage, like in this next fight, Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping at UFC 100.
Coolest man in the UK, 18-1 overall. Never will be an easy man to fight against.
They were both MMA legends, which is what made this fight so epic. Before their famous fight at UFC 100, Bisping talked trash all the time to make his opponents nervous. He also heckled Henderson while they were both coaches on Season 9 of The Ultimate Fighter. Finally, on July 11th, 2009, the two men fought in the octagon. This was supposed to be their chance to face Anderson Silva, who was the middleweight champion at the time. At the 3-minute mark of the second round, Hendo hit his opponent in the abdomen with a body jab to get Bisping to bring his hands down. As soon as his opponent did it, Henderson threw his trademark H-bomb, a hard overhand right. The two-time Pride champion knocked the Englishman out. Bisping fell down and his neck was rigid and practically stretched out as he looked listlessly up at the ceiling. A few seconds later, he threw a useless follow-up punch, but his opponent was too out of it to even respond. It's one of the most savage knockouts in UFC history. It's also one of the best. At the time, Henderson was only the second person to beat Bisping, but he was the first to knock him out. Bisping isn't the only fighter with a reputation that makes them seem invincible, though. Some champions just have an air of invincibility around them, which is what makes the knockout so cool. Like in this next fight, Jessica Ai versus Valentina Shevchenko at UFC 238. Valentina Shevchenko is one such champion who looks almost impossible to beat.
She is one of the best martial artists on the planet Earth, and Jessica Ai is going to need all that swagger, all that confidence.
Dana White's MMA reigning flyweight queen's a patient and sneaky counter-striker who was supposed to defend her new divisional crown against Jessica Ai in 2019. Jessica was in charge of a winning streak of 3 fights. Before her fight with Shevchenko, she talked some trash. She said that the former world champion kickboxer sped up the training videos on Instagram. She accused her opponent of making herself seem faster than she really was. I put her idea to the test on fight night. She got hit by Bullet's strong round kicks to the abdomen for most of the first round. So as soon as the second round started, Shevchenko pretended to throw another body kick. Sadly, when Evil Eye dropped her arms to block or catch the kick, her opponent's leg went into a higher chamber. The knockout was so vicious that at the press conference they even asked Valentina if she felt bad for hurting her like that.
First of all, of course, it's sport. It's MMA, and we are training for this.
Yikes. It's not just invincible champions that always come out on top, though. Sometimes it's the underdog that surprises us, like in this next fight, Uriah Hall versus Adam Cella at TUF 17. Hall had never been able to win a world title in the UFC. The second-degree black belt in Kyokushin Karate was thought to be a future champion, and the heir to Anderson Silva's middleweight crown for a long time. Sadly, the predictions were made too soon and didn't come true in the end. But Uriah Hall was a strong fighter with lightning-fast blows and knockout power that could shake the earth. And it all went down in the 17th season of the reality TV show The Ultimate Fighter. It was his major fight against Adam Cella in one of the numerous fights that decided who got signed by the UFC. One of the most scary knockouts in the history of the promotion happened at the end of the fight. Hall faked a jab, which made Cella want to fight with his hands. But once his opponent gave in and tried to block the karateka's jab, Hall looked for his chance. Cella's right chin was out in the open. The future middleweight champion gave his opponent a spinning hook kick that knocked him down cold. Once the dust settled, it was just as scary as it looked at the time. The unsuccessful TUF participant was lying on the mat, gasping for air as his chest rose and fell. His body didn't twitch or stiffen, yet he didn't get up and couldn't move. His lungs worked hard to breathe, but that was all. Cella stayed that way for a scary amount of time, not moving and not getting better. Fears grew that he might not be able to get back up at all. When Hall realized what he'd done, though, he was sorry. When Cella finally stood back up, the fighters and authorities around him gave a big round of applause. All of these fights were fine and good, but this next one's just an important part of UFC history, like everyone knows about it. I'm talking about Tim Sylvia and Trey Telligman at UFC 54. The fight between Tim Sylvia and Trey Telligman is part of MMA lore. When they fought in the octagon, the two men were at quite different positions in their careers. Former UFC heavyweight champion, the Maniac, had a record of 18 wins and only 2 losses. Trauma was just in his second UFC bout. At the time, he had a terrible record of 7-4-1. It was an unfair contest, which was clear right away when Sylvia beat Telligman badly in the first round. Telligman was so bloodied and beat up that it would have been a TKO win today. He really had no chance. At the very end of the first round, the Maniac gave Trauma the scariest knockout in the history of the promotion. A head kick that hit so hard that Trauma had to be carried out of the ring, and he was never the same again. Even worse, Telligman quit after the fight. People thought he was done for because of the harm Sylvia's head kick did to his brain. This was based on the fact that he suddenly and mysteriously disappeared from public view after retiring from sports. The good news is that these stories are just MMA urban legends. Trey Telligman's alive and well, and he's taken on the role of coach with ease. That's all for the scariest knockouts in UFC history.